Hello, and welcome to Kroll's Security Concepts podcast, the podcast where Kroll security experts discuss the more prevalent topics in today's risk environment. Today's topic is one that's going to be of great concern to a lot of pharmaceuticals coming up, and that is the protection of the supply chain as they try to get their vaccines out and into general distribution. For this topic, we've brought in three managing directors from across Kroll practices. Stacy Scott is a managing director in Kroll's cyber risk practice based in Texas. Stacy was the CISO for one of the largest healthcare companies in Texas and has guided several organizations' cybersecurity programs as a virtual CISO before leading cyber risk strategy for Kroll, focusing on effective ways to improve clients' cyber resilience. Richard Dailly is an MD in Kroll's business intelligence and investigations practice in Hong Kong. He recently relocated from Kroll's Singapore office, prior to which he established Kroll's office in Mumbai. In 2013, following the collapse of the Rana Plaza building in Bangladesh, Richard established Kroll's interest in modern slavery and human trafficking within corporate supply chains. He is a fellow of the Duff & Phelps Institute. Nick Doyle is a managing director for Kroll and leads the security risk management practice in EMEA, and has managed over 600 projects in 70 countries in his time at Kroll. Nick holds a master's degree in security management and is a former military and law enforcement and specializes in helping companies mitigate security risk and has worked on many crisis management and supply chain risk management cases for our clients. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be on this podcast with my colleagues, Richard and Stacy.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you guys here. It's nice to have experts on this topic. This is a very important topic in today's environment. We're going to jump right into the first question here. What are the top issues facing pharmaceutical supply chains in the development and distribution of vaccines today?
Yeah, so pharmaceutical supply chains are a growing concern due to COVID-19 vaccine development and its eventual distribution. Capacity is going to be the issue, though. Capacity around distribution, capacity around temperature-controlled containers. So governments and industry are going to have to work collectively together and plan, and that's the key word, plan. Businesses are used to moving a lot of products, but the size of the distribution required will be unprecedented. We saw an indication of this around the distribution of personal protective equipment, which is still ongoing now. So security has to be end-to-end because any breach could shake confidence. So the success of a vaccine is partly because of their medical effects and partially because of public confidence. And security does support public confidence. So planning and assessing potential weak links in what might be a hurried and wide-scale rollout should be a priority for companies. And we've seen, in the front page of the newspapers in the UK this week where a pharmaceutical company had moved to a new warehouse, which had led to a very significant drop in processing capability. This could impact COVID testing alongside tests for cancer and heart disease. So where companies are looking to expand or move or streamline their business operations and capacity building, this may cause issues where businesses have moved to ill-prepared sites. So even though situations may be fast-moving, companies will still need to look ahead to try and anticipate issues. So again, planning is the key focus for companies at this time.
That's very interesting, Nick. So I have to imagine if we see a truck full of COVID-19 vaccine hijacked and hit the black market with this new medicine, we'd have some serious issues with both the trust with people going out to receive their vaccines and trust in that they don't know whether they're getting the real vaccine or some black market version or something that's been just stolen and hit the market in a unprotected way. Stacy, when you see the cyber side of this, what issues are you seeing in that supply chain for the pharmaceutical the vaccines that might be coming out in the very near future?
We're seeing a lot of attention obviously paid to the full supply chain and even before distribution. We're seeing it in, research and development and getting it out of manufacturing and developing of a formulary for these vaccines. Everybody wants to be the first to develop this global vaccine that's likely going to be needed in mass quantity, or at least to be prepared in mass quantity. So we're seeing attacks on, manufacturing and logistics within companies, to try and get information, to race, against the clock and race against each other to be the first one to hit the market with it. And so with that, we're also seeing, we expect to see attacks on logistics like you're talking about. Once, if we can't beat you to the formulary and get our vaccine out before yours, whether it's a company or a government, we're seeing, or we are likely to see attacks on, well, let's disrupt their distribution so we can at least beat them to that punch as well. With PPE, we already saw this as well. It was, who can get us what we need now? Who can get us the hand sanitizer? Who can get us these, N95s the fastest, because we just need them now. And I think the vaccine's going to follow suit in that way. And so the attacks are on all the systems, all the data that, used to communicate, used to develop, used to, follow the process, the workflow of any kind of supply chain. Where is my truck? What's on the truck? How many vaccines are on the truck? Where is it going? Is it going to the right place? Have we received payment? We're seeing attacks on all of those types of systems, and folks just fishing around for more information on, corporate networks, but also in those supply chain systems and monitoring. A lot of that is, cloud-based now. And when you get to logistics, there's a lot of IoT on those trucks that monitors where they are, and tracks on a geo map, right, where they're located and where they're headed. And we're seeing a lot of attacks on those types of things. And so folks are looking to not only rush to get, the information and the vaccine developed and out and distributed, but they're looking to put in the protections and really detections to see if anything, is going wrong or is disrupted, and respond to it as quickly as possible.
Very interesting. So basically, we have parties from several different entities that might be trying to disturb or disrupt your overall supply chain because they don't want you to be first to market, or they want to actually have access to the vaccines that you're putting out for their own personal reasons. So we're seeing several different vectors of threat approaching the supply chain, whether it be cyber, whether it be physical. Really, the big question from me would be, how much is this is every day? All the pharmaceuticals might be facing this every day, and how much of it is directly based on COVID-19 and this vaccine that everybody's waiting for? Are we seeing an increase in this based on COVID-19?
I think we are, Jeff. I think it's definitely, COVID has definitely intensified and increased the quantity. And there's different reasons, different motivations for these attacks. Obviously, there's the economic gain. If we get to market faster and we have control or disrupt somebody else, we can sell more vaccines and make more financial gain. But there's also social reasons as well. Maybe they disagree. Maybe it's someone, just trying to disrupt someone they disagree with socially. So, and the pandemic has, like most things, intensified, and allowed us to focus on some of these things. It's the biggest thing happening, and it's global, right? Everybody potentially needs a vaccine. Is it the right vaccine? And it is definitely upped the number of attacks we're seeing, the number of simple phishing emails to get more information, the number of malware and ransomware attacks that are going on different companies in these industries.
Time pressure and public scrutiny. Time pressure is the nemesis of planning, and the public is unforgiving of even small areas that can be whipped up by a media that doesn't necessarily understand the issues or implications. So essentially, a small public blunder can be heavily punished due to media scrutiny. The point is that as a company now is not the time to have a gaffe or a blunder, like in the question I answered previously, especially when it impacts the medical supply chain. You need to look ahead, you need to think, am I moving to a new distribution depot? What do I need to do to anticipate issues that I may not normally worry about? to minimize or reduce potential impacts of a potentially reputationally damaging story because of a failure of planning. So I think that my key message continually throughout this podcast is for pharmaceutical companies and people within the pharmaceutical supply chain is plan, plan, plan.
Excellent. So basically what we have is there is an increased risk, and we've seen evidence of that being even more greatly increased by COVID-19 and the rush to be able to get a vaccine out. When we talk about all these things and all the threats that are there, what are we advising our pharmaceutical clients to do to try to protect themselves from both a physical and a cybersecurity element?
I think if I could just come in again briefly, I think pharmaceutical companies need to have an aligned media strategy to ensure that the locations they operate out of are secure and not susceptible to breaches and or intrusion. So people can't walk in to the front door because the access control system is poor or perimeter fences are inadequate or monitoring systems such as CCTV are not effective.
Well, that's good to hear, Nick. Now, on the cyber side, Stacy, what are the practical organization approaches to protecting data and technology supporting these functions of supply chain from a cybersecurity perspective?
It's a great question. And I think what organizations practically need to focus on, because there's a lack of time, is detection. How do we detect if something is malicious or being disrupted or even potentially suspicious, and respond as quickly as possible? You'd ideally want to put protections in place, lock things down. There likely already are some protections in place. Review those, and look throughout each function and process of and phase of a supply chain and distribution network. Review your third parties, and while you're looking at those protections, make sure you have good monitoring in place to understand where things are at all times and when those alerts may come up and who's looking at those, and do they know when to alert and who to alert if something does go wrong, and how are you going to respond? Are you going to how do you get a hold of your third parties if you've outsourced any part of this, which you likely have? And how do they respond as quickly as you'd like them to as well? And I think having that plan together is kind of the fail-safe that companies need to be looking at.
Interesting. So, when I'm looking at a lot of this, we're seeing media attention focus quite a bit on the vaccines and the development of the vaccines. And we're starting to see a lot of push from global intelligence agencies that are really focusing on these. Do you guys have any thoughts on what's happening there in the vaccine development world and intelligence agencies tracking what's happening? Do we see any issues or trends in that particular environment?
Yes. Well, I think we have to realize that we don't live in a cozy liberal world, and that nation states are increasingly factionalized. And even before COVID became an issue, states were becoming more focused on their own sovereignty and protective of their own direct environments and closest allies. So, we have to realize that any issue which presents an opportunity for world powers to increase their influence, their power around the world, that they will take. And the reality is that COVID does present a threat to most countries in the world, to all countries in the world, be that directly to the populations, or be that secondarily to the economies of those countries. So we have to realize that intelligence agencies, defense agencies around the world are going to be looking at supply chains, because they're going to be, first of all, wanting to protect their own countries, but secondly, where they can, to influence and potentially weaken countries that they perceive as being hostile. Maybe not just nation states either, but non-state actors as well. So we have to recognize this is a real possibility. So what could they do? What might they do? I mean, the newspapers have been saying this week that there's a possibility that nations would be literally spying on each other for intelligence around the vaccines themselves and the chemical makeup of the vaccines themselves. There's the real possibility that larger states will coerce smaller states, will coerce satellite states. There will be significant debt issues in the future following the in a post-COVID world. There'll be future debt issues, which a large world power will be able to leverage and manipulate smaller countries. So I can see that new lines, if you like, of alliances could well emerge. And finally, on this issue, I think we need to think back to the recent examples in the US and in Europe of disinformation. So, if I was a hostile intelligence agency thinking about how I might disrupt the supply chain, I would consider using social media and other ways of informing the population through basically what we now call fake news, that perhaps those supply chains have been compromised, and that the real vaccine is not getting through, and that it's something which is not effective or is in fact dangerous to put people off taking it. All of these things, potentially could weaken nation states, but they're aggressive actions by other countries. I think it's a real threat, and I think it may require some new thinking by countries as to how they deal with this.
So what I'm hearing from your answers is that there are going to be alliances forged through the vaccine supply chain as people get this vaccine around the world. And that could have a long-term impact on world events and previous notations of globalization. What do you guys have to say about that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've said this before in other formats, other presentations, Jeff, that I think we could be moving into a completely new era. And Nick brought this up in one of his previous answers about industry and states working together. And that's clearly going to have to happen. I mean, nation states, the infrastructure which supports nation states is going to have to help and work closely with industry in numerous ways, but particularly in supply chains. And it's going to mean that defense agencies and intelligence agencies are going to have to really take on board the requirements of pharmaceutical firms in order to help their own populations, as it were. So I certainly could foresee a future which could be extremely complicated to untangle, where countries form alliances through who are deemed to be their supporters, alliances, suppliers within vaccine distribution and vaccine supply chains. It would be a slightly frightening new way of looking at the world, but I think we have to start thinking in those ways.
That was very interesting. I have to imagine as we go through this, and every time there's been large global events, there's been different alliances made. Now we have potential alliances just to get things distributed because everybody wants it first. Everybody has the issues. They all want to have the vaccine first. How are they going to play together to make this happen? And how is that going to impact other people that may not be in the same team as those ones that are playing together? It's all very intriguing. I want to thank everybody for coming on and talking about this. I want to thank everybody for listening. I hope everybody found it informative, and we hope to see you on the next one.